everyone who created them and understands them is retired. Information isn't getting to the right person at the right time. We all now, even an individual contributor, can effectively have a team. Go do the job.
All right, welcome to the Kill Chain podcast, Darrin. So you've got a really interesting background. You've got a couple of successful exits with some early startups that you did, and now you're sitting at one of my more favorite companies in the logistics space, Platform Science. So could you give us kind of a background on who you are and what you've done?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to do that. I've lived it's funny. I live in San Diego. I was born here, but I've always lived in California in some way, right? So, super young, I got into programming, went over to my grandma's house, and she had the internet before I did, and I, downloaded and printed out quick basic manuals and stuff, and got into that when I was really young. And then eventually I moved down here in my early 20s and answered a Craigslist ad and connected with one of the executive founders of our company now, Platform Science, but he was at the time running a development agency. So I joined there, early employee. And we were, building, this was back in 2006 or 7. So right before the iPhone came out, like we got to watch the keynote from the office kind of deal. And we were building websites and things. And then once we were able to start building apps and mobile technology, we kind of tried to hop on that wave as quick as we could. And so, fast forward a couple of years, we grew that agency, and it was doing really well. And then I decided I wanted to go off and, try my own thing for a bit, right? Just see if I could build a company myself, and ended up going down the internet marketing rabbit hole a little bit, and, search engine optimization and those types of things. Built a couple of different SaaS products that did pretty well. Ultimately found out it's kind of hard to outrun Google, so exited those. But they did well at the time, and then that led to about 2014 or so. I was kind of contracting, just helping some folks out with their companies, and that guy Jake that I'd worked for before gave me a call. He's like, "Hey man, you want to come and work on truck stuff?" And I was like, "Not really. I don't know." I growing up, my dad's been a truck driver my whole life, and I just never really paid attention, right? I was like, yeah, that's his job. And he's like, "No, you kind of want to check this out." And so this is about 2015, and I came back, and he kind of gave me a rundown on things, and then I hopped in and helped build out the product group, and for 5-6 years I was leading that group and focusing on getting both our platform and our application suite ready for the enterprise. We decided to go for enterprise customers initially, which meant we had to build a whole lot of stuff before anybody would use it. But we took a lot of the inspiration for the model of the company, and the architectural model of the products was really informed by the smartphone era, right? We were like, why does every software company have to be a hardware company to serve this industry of transportation, right? And we wanted to decouple that and allow people to, there's valid reasons you got to install or add additional hardware, but a lot of use cases can be served through applications and software only. And we just wanted to open that up, create an ecosystem for it, right? So that's what we focused on. And then after that, once we started kind of commercializing, getting some customers, I shifted over to focusing on like sales engineering and solution architecture, growing those teams we needed to serve the enterprise customers, a very highly integrated space. We're integrating this software older than me and all day long, and we got to figure that out. And then most recently, the last couple of years, I've been leading more of the strategy and corporate development side. So we made a large acquisition last year, and I was involved in that amongst a great team here that helped us get that through. And now I spend a lot of time focusing on like go-to-market strategy and product strategy, just kind of think of it as like sitting between customers, the revenue organization, the product organization, saying like, what's the best fit? What do we need to do here, right? So it's been 11 years here now. It's been a wild ride. Learned a lot, had a lot of opportunity to learn a lot, and we spent a lot of time with some of the biggest transportation companies out there, small transportation companies. You get to see the similarities and differences. It's pretty fascinating. I laugh about me saying no early on, like I don't want to work with trucking. It's like, it is actually a pretty interesting space once you get in there and understand scale and the complexities of it.
Well, it's interesting kind of your background when you started with mobile technologies back at the early days of the iPhone, and now fast forward to what you're doing. And I think it's funny because when people ask me, what does Platform Science do? I try to simplify it as much as possible. And I basically say they're like the iPhone for trucks. Like, is that how you would explain it?
It generally is either that or Android, right? Android's probably a better like more pristine example, because while Google obviously they have their own line of phones, they generally, that's not their focus, right? They built the abstraction layer between hardware and software, right? And there's many phone manufacturers and there's many application makers, and they all they have to be concerned with generally is, am I compatible with the platform, rather than like, is my app going to run on this specific phone, right? You don't normally have to think of it that way. Whereas Apple obviously took a very verticalized approach, and it's getting more vertical every day, but it's still conceptually it's the same idea, right? That abstraction, so that you don't have to be preoccupied with the hardware layer if you're a software maker.
Right.
Or if you're a hardware maker, it's like, cool, I can build to this platform standard effectively, and then I can tap into an ecosystem or support an ecosystem of application developers. And yeah, I mean, when we were starting with when we jumped into the mobile stuff, initially it was like little dinky apps, right? We really didn't know, nobody really knew what they were doing. It's a whole new form factor and modality of software. And then early on, Jake has a background in like snowboarding and ski, and we had clients that were, ski resorts and everything. And we actually, my first real taste of like telematics, if you will, tracking a moving thing, was we had built an app for skiers and snowboarders to track their runs on a mountain, right? Which it ended up, I couldn't have had the foresight at the time to realize the parallels, right? But there's some interesting challenges when you go do something like that. Like, one, you don't generally have connectivity all the time when you're on a mountain, especially in 2009 or something. Two is most people are wearing gloves, right? So we even experimented with like, should we make the app like where you can tap your nose on the screen to like press a button or something because it's freezing cold, and they hadn't made the gloves with the touch sensitivity yet. And you fast forward to working with transportation, and it's like, yeah, like, sometimes, some of the tropes and stereotypes are real. These guys have big, strong hands, big fingers. It's hard to, tap these small buttons, and there's all these UX considerations you have to make. Or they're standing outside, it's snowing and it's mud and all this stuff, and it's like they might have gloves on, they might be greasy, we don't know. And that's where all the fascinating stuff started coming up, where your consumer assumptions, the architectural model of the consumer smartphone platforms was sound, but then the use cases you actually run into in the real world with transportation generally extend beyond the general consumer. And it's we've been just kind of navigating that all along the way. Like, how do we make this the best fit and truly like focus on the drivers and focus on the transportation professionals to make them safer and more productive, and whatever we can do to support it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too how anything that goes mobile presents a whole new set of problems. Like, and a lot of ones that you don't even know. Like from a, just from a cybersecurity perspective, and that's, more of what we do.
Right.
When you talk about the endpoint of a network, it's no longer your Wi-Fi adapter. Now
Yeah.
it's actually a vehicle. You sometimes don't know where it is. And
Yep.
you don't know who's touching it and what's around and what environment it's in and things like that. And so it's really kind of opened our eyes too, as like we push the network out to the edge. Even in the
Yes.
defense space, you've got soldiers out in the field in a combat environment with an Android device, sitting on their wrist.
Right.
And so it presents a whole new set of problems. I never actually thought of someone standing in the snow with gloves on trying to do an inspection on their tires before their
Right.
shift starts. I hadn't thought of that one. Was there any other like major issues that you guys found like when you were starting? Because well, let's go back to like the architecture. So you've got
Right.
a couple different devices in the truck, and then other
Right.
vendors can add their hardware if needed and connect into your device as well. Could you kind of give like almost an ecosystem overview of how that works?
Yeah, I can do that, and then it'll actually connect to some other interesting challenges we ran into, at least early on. It's like, pretty much if you look at us or really any other like modern telematics solution, you're looking at some sort of two device configuration, right? You have, because of like the ELD law and things, you have to have some sort of black box like thing that's actually connected to the vehicle, the bus, the network with all the data on it. So you can detect motion of the vehicle and all that for compliance reasons. So, we have a smart gateway. It runs, the software necessary to accumulate that data and then send it wherever it needs to be sent, right? So there's cloud configuration, send the data up for tracking purposes. And then the other side of the device spectrum is, something the driver, especially in heavy duty trucking, because they all have to be legally compliant with the ELD law. They all have some mobile device, right? And, for the most part, the days of like wiring from the driver display to the black box is kind of gone away. and so it's all a wireless connection, right? Either Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. But so that's the general physical configuration. There's some smart black box thing, and then there's some sort of mobile device. And in our case, it's an Android-based device. We put layers of software on top that's basically like another operating system, which can transform either an in-dash display or a tablet or a phone into a managed device intended for transportation, right? So things like actually having awareness of the duty status of the driver. So like if they indicate they're in the sleeper berth, you legally can't like alert them unless there's like a tornado coming or something, right? Like, and so you can't just let the dings and the pings go on, and so we have to suppress those things down. You want to lock it when it's in motion, all these things, right? So we don't just toss a bunch of apps on a tablet. It's in a designed system for drivers. But what was interesting is early on, like when we were looking at what the physical configuration is going to need to be, you immediately run into some interesting architectural challenges, right? Which is like, there's no particular guarantee that there's going to be the same driver in a vehicle using the same mobile device. Even the black boxes move around. They harvest them out of an old vehicle, put them in a new one. So there's just this constant change of configuration. There's all these pairings and all these different things, right? There's valid and invalid reasons why there may not be a tablet in the vehicle, right? There may not be a driver logged into it. There's legal implications, regulatory implications to that. And so we had to design everything to kind of expand and contract dynamically, because if you made this assumption of like, yeah, it needs to be this tablet in this truck, and that's just not how the fleet chooses to operate, you're getting a lot of support calls at that point, right? Like, hey, can you repair my tablet to this truck? It's like, no, you can't do that. You got to be flexible. Other interesting things, like to your points around like, any like physical, like edge oriented system, it's actually, you bring up the soldiers, right? And it's like, obviously truck driving isn't as extreme as a war scenario or anything like that. But one of the things that you run into, there's a lot of fleets where we basically adopted a mentality early on that upon installation of all of our stuff, assume you're never going to physically touch that thing again. That truck's just gone, right? And all of a sudden, the degree of hardening, the degree of investment in like remote and over-the-air support, self-recovery, all those types of things really goes up, because it's not as simple as just saying like, oh, can you just come here and we'll work on it, right? Like that's kind of like the worst case scenario is you have to call a driver and say, can you bring your truck in? Because that that's at odds with what they do, right? They need to be moving freight, not getting a gateway replaced. And so we had to really invest a lot into that. A funny one that we ran into really early on, kind of out of naivete until we really learned stuff, is like we had like a self-check system when you install everything, right? That validated that cell connections were working, wireless connections were working, and GPS was working. And we tested it just fine in our offices and location, but then we ran into the problem of when a mechanic is installing it in a truck, they're in a big metal shed most of the time, something big enough to hold a tractor and a trailer sometimes. And it's like a giant Faraday cage. It just blocks everything, right? And all of these self-checks we were like, oh, okay. And so we had to kind of engineer around that to go, confirm that the capabilities are there, but you may not actually be able to get the certain lock and all that type of stuff. And then just have it self-recover later on. And so all these things, it's kind of like a whack-a-mole when you're in those early stages of like, you can have a great design, but the edge cases are pretty strong initially until you actually get into the real world. And then you can start to react and go, okay, let me harden it here, harden it here, harden it here.
That's interesting. So from like a product perspective, you've been in like thought leadership, strategic leadership on like product development for a while. Like what would you recommend for startups that are just getting out there? Like, they say that a failure is only a failure if you don't learn from it. Is that kind of the idea, is like just get it out there, get it in the customer's hands, let them break it and fix it? Like what would be your advice there?
I think there's probably like two stages to think about it, right? One is when you're more in the ideation phase, right? Like you see a potential like problem area or insufficiencies or gaps or something, and you want to go solve for it. The number one thing, and this applies once you have a product too, but in that early phase, the number one thing is just go do the job of the eventual user, right? Like, and there's a great book for anybody in product or software or anything. It's called the MOM test, right? And it basically is a whole book about how to validate your idea without leading the witness, right? Like kind of the last thing you want to do is like put software in somebody's hands and be like, what do you think? Do you like it? Because generally humans are nice people, right? And they're sometimes reluctant to be like, no, this is terrible. I don't want to use this, right? Some people
Right.
are, and those are fun conversations. But
They're rare, but they exist.
yeah, exactly. Everyone's generally polite, right? Or in respectful of the hard work you put in, but that doesn't necessarily validate anything. So, there's certain ways to ask people and discover things, but one of the best ways, just go do the jobs with the eventual users, because the things you can look for. Because the other thing is that asking somebody to describe what they do, like, where are your pain points, etc. They'll have answers for you, but their job isn't to think about better software, right? A truck driver's not thinking about what the best mobile experience is, right? That's not what they're focused on, and so it's kind of it's like unfair to think that they can just nail it on that answer, right? You have to go observe all of the things that they don't vocalize or they're not thinking about. Like, and a good example is when you have early prototypes or something, especially mobile software, is if you just quietly just watch somebody interact with it, you give them no instructions to interact with it, and you'll see that every once in a while they'll like tap something that they think is a button, and it's like, and your instinct is to be like, no, the button's over here. And it's like, no. The problem is they think that thing's a button. Like, you got to make that not look like a button, or make it more immediately intuitive. And the only way you can do that is just by diving right in, right? Another good test I've always told people is, like, when you're doing that process, always pay attention to when they leave your product, when they leave your software, right? And so, like, on the back office side, the easiest tell is like when they bust open Excel, right? They take data out of your product and they go into Excel. That may be perfectly valid. Excel and spreadsheets are amazing tools, but it also may be indicating that your product stopped too soon, right? It's not. It's just providing the data, not the answer or the computation or whatever it is, and they had to switch tools to go solve for that. And then that's a decision you have to make. Like, do we go further, or do we accept that as or take that as acceptable? And same deal with drivers, right? If you see them using your product, and all of a sudden they're like writing stuff on a notepad. It's like, oh, maybe we're stopping too soon, right? We should make this information available when they need it. Versus when they're, and actually that example directly informed some of our early design decisions, because my first ride along I ever did with a driver. We were entering a yard, and I was just kind of watching him do his thing. I was trying not to interrupt him because we were in a yard, and I noticed that he pulled a notepad out of his visor and wrote something down when we were at a stop. And then we were just like slowly moving through the yard. There's like 1,000 trailers, and I was like, hey, what'd you write down? Why are we doing this? And he's like, I got to go find this specific trailer per the number on the side, the corner of it. But when we're moving, my in-cab is a different device at that time, different product. It locks. So when I'm moving, I can't interact with it and get that information. So if I don't write it down, I either have to remember it or come to a stop. And so that was his workaround. And so we were like, wow, okay. We should make it so that when the device is locked, a fleet can configure it to show certain information or put a little widget or something there. Like, here's your appointment time, here's your trailer that you need to find, whatever, so that the driver doesn't have to have that workaround in place anymore. And that's something no one would have, if I ever just said like, hey, what do you need? That's probably not going to be solicited back
Right.
automatically. You got to go do the job.
Yeah, that's it. That's really interesting. Yeah, you definitely learn a lot. One of the things that I always found is that a lot of times, like even in the defense world, people who are designing things for the defense world, like they have not actually sat in a Humvee before, or else they'd
Right.
probably make it a little bit more comfortable. Like maybe
Yeah.
don't put boxes everywhere, so you're going to slam your knee every
Right.
time, and develop knee injuries over time, just not because of enemy interaction or combat, but because you keep hitting your knee every time you
Right.
climb into the Humvee on that radio box or whatever it is.
Right. Right.
Well,
Yeah.
well, that
That's Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, yeah. So it's kind of interesting, just putting yourself in their shoes. Like, how does AI play into this? Like, there's obviously a huge play for AI, and I know it's kind of a leading question because I know you've been leading some AI initiatives and stuff within platform science as well. But how do you see that changing? Like, are we going to start having like agentic end-to-end workflows like in the truck, so it just kind of learns what the driver's doing and starts taking over some of that? I mean, and we can go into autonomous trucking later, but like
Right.
still with drivers in the vehicles, how does that look?
Yeah. So the way, like, my mental model for thinking about AI, because we're in a crazy time right now, right?
Very
Like,
crazy.
the way I've described it is it's like a weird it's one of those rare times when it's like it's both fascinating and slightly scary, where you're like,
Hmm.
this is going so fast, but it's really cool and it seems to be incredibly impactful. So that speed and times impact is always a little like, ooh, that's unsettling. But all right, let's take advantage of it to the fullest. Let's really tap into the value, right? So the mental model I'd look at is kind of like four layers, right? There's like AI in your products, right? Like AI could be the interface, right? The agentic
Hmm.
interface. It could be under the hood and like, calculating things or automating a lot more than traditional software could do. Then there's AI to make products, right? Which that's dramatically evolving and has dramatically evolved in just the last 2 or 3 months. And I think every software company in the world is now in a position to rethink how to build software, right? Like
Hmm.
it's fundamentally shifted, and it doesn't look like it's going to reverse ever, right? It's only going to keep going in a certain
Yep.
direction. Um, and then there's AI for delivering and operating the products, right? There's, uh, when you're going to debug something or observe behavior at scale, that's a really challenging thing to do as a human. It's also really challenging to do even systematically because you don't necessarily know what you're looking for, right? You're just
Hmm.
like, it's just giant needles and haystack problems, right? Whereas these models are incredibly good at, you can kind of just chuck a bunch of stuff in front of them and it's like, hey, what about this, this, and this? Because it can just see through the noise. And then last is the rest of the business, right? AI for everything else, right? And really, it's, whenever you get to any scale of a business, it doesn't take that many people. It's just like with AI, the context is the key, right? Like giving it the right information at the right time to make the right call. That's the same problem we all face in any human organization, right? It's like you could walk up to me and be like, "Hey, I need you to make the desserts for the party this weekend," and I'm like, is it, what kind of party is it, a birthday party for a kid, or is it a wedding? Like, I don't know. But if you had given me that context up front, I'd be like, I got it, all right, I can take care of that. and
Yep.
um and so, inevitably, especially startups, you when you start scaling really rapidly, um, sometimes systems and processes they're not at the forefront of what you're trying to do. You're really just trying to continue to scale to on the customer facing side, on the product side, right? And so you end up in a configuration where you have a lot of human to human interaction. You have a
Hmm.
lot of siloed knowledge, or knowledge that's just in somebody's head as opposed to accessible beyond. And I kind of joke about it. It's like if any, you use Slack or Teams or any like chat thing, it's like certain people become like the company's Google, right? People just message them. They're like, hey, what's
Hmm.
the answer to this, right? And it's like you got to
They
break
are the
that out.
knowledge base.
Exactly. And luckily now and it's always been such a laborious process to transform someone's brain and the information in it into a true knowledge base that's accessible, right? Like, it's the last thing anybody wants to do is write documentation. Um, we're now in a world where the tooling makes that a heck of a lot easier, a lot less effort necessary, a lot less friction. I mean, you can just kind of just talk for a while or record conversations and then turn it into, full featured stuff. And so, to back to your original question, like that's my mental model for it, right? When it comes to like, let's just focus on drivers. I think there's a couple interesting things here. One is that it's a relatively constrained domain, right? It's like, and that's a
Hmm.
beautiful thing when you're trying to change the user interaction patterns, because it basically has its own known semantics, right? It's like the driver's
Hmm.
not going to ask a question about how to fly a plane because they're driving a truck, right? So you can kind of constrain that down, and that lends itself really well to agentic tooling, agentic interfaces. I think the real key, though, is that, and we're pretty close, if not already there, it really needs to be edge oriented, right? Like a model that's running literally in the hands of the driver or some compute nearby, both because of like latency, and there's still we're going to have connectivity blackout areas no matter what. Your driver's going to drive somewhere where they don't have connectivity, right? So you don't want that to break the product entirely. And then two is it's a cost thing, right? It's a different cost model because you got to distribute and manage an edge AI model, but you're not making the transactional requests to some backend service or to even your own self-hosted thing. And I think that that's the only real way to make it scalable and possible in our industry. And so we're looking really closely at that. And even the local models are just a couple months behind the state of the art right now. It's pretty crazy to watch. And there's some really impressive like small models that you can run perfectly fine on a phone or a tablet that can do voice, text to speech, speech to text. You can do, if you have that constrained domain, you can do real agentic work, because you're not expecting it. It's not like it's trying to be ChatGPT where it's serving 1 out of 8 people in the world. It's serving a very specific user base, and so we're looking at that a lot. We're like I said before, like I would assume almost every other software company, we're looking at it. There's a lot of interesting challenges or things to think about in terms of like Conway's law, right? Which is like your products tend to look how you organized, or you organize in a way to make your products look that way. And but the other part of it is, the traditional model of how to organize like a product and engineering group is, 6 to 8 people. You got a product manager, a bunch of engineers, and you were trying to optimizing for the different constraints that existed. But some of those constraints are shifting rapidly, right? And all of a sudden, it's like, well, do we need to organize differently to make this the most effective configuration? And so, I don't know. It's changing a lot every day, and I think we're all just trying to keep up. But it's exciting, in my opinion. I think it's an incredible thing we're watching play out in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. From the model perspective, do you guys have specific, frameworks that you're looking at? Like, I don't know if we really want to talk about OpenClaw and all of that. Like
Yeah.
everybody's talking about OpenClaw right now. But like, is there specific frameworks that you're looking at or specific models that you're looking at? And like, how are you evaluating them to decide where you want to go?
Yeah. So there's kind of two buckets, right? There's the big hosted state of the art models. So you got basically it's OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google's Gemini are like the 3 leaders. There's many others, but those are kind of the 3 key ones, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses, right? I think OpenAI is probably the most or ChatGPT type models are probably the most human sounding. It's almost like casual, but they're very impressive. Gemini is really impressive from like a context window. It has that massive context window, so you can do like really big chunky work. It's also of the 3, I think they're probably the best in terms of enterprise readiness, which is probably the play that Google is trying to make, right? Because they have an interesting verticalized approaches too. All of that was done on their own chips that they made, right? That's a really important part of what they're doing. And then Anthropic is pretty darn good at writing software, right? And so like the way we look at it is like, and then you have all these, the other types of state of the art that are coming out that you can host yourself, right? And it's before, like even just a year ago, it was like to host yourself was kind of a crazy concept. You needed, GPUs and compute clusters that most companies even don't buy, much less consumers. But Apple's done a great job of leading, like, hey, here's compute that can run pretty large models well enough for you to rely on for a lot of things. So I think if we were having this conversation a year from now, it's going to be a very different landscape. The way we look at it is, you got the model, which is the brain. Then there's the harness around it, the agentic layer, like Claude Code or even OpenClaw is like kind of that example. And then there's like a framework or set of guardrails that you used with the harness on top of the model, right? And for us, as a company, we have a lot of, like, just thinking about software development, we have a lot of software developers, we have a lot of product managers, we have all this stuff. And so we're very eager and excited to go down the path of like transforming by using these tools, but it's super, super easy to end up with like 50 different implementation versions of the same approach, right? And so we're trying to be very thoughtful of like, at a minimum, here are the best practices. Here are these strict guardrails. Like, we serve very large enterprise customers. We have very strict guardrails we have to follow, right? And so there's a non-negotiable set of policies internally around like, no, you're not allowed to do that, and that.
Like, don't just install OpenClaw on your work machine and let it go.
Yeah, I mean, even like what's even tricky is like the companies making all these tools are moving so fast that they just release new like when Anthropic came out with the Cowork tab in the desktop app, right? It looks cool, but it can just control your computer, right? And it's like, yeah, that's an enterprise nightmare, right? Like where it's like, oh no, and it's like, we just said, all right, you use this in the browser now. Nobody's allowed to use a desktop app. Like we're done, right? Because we can't stop them from releasing capabilities, and they're not giving really anybody enough controls. Like if they had given enterprise level controls of like, no, turn off Cowork, we don't want that, it would have been fine, but we just had to take a different approach to keep the policies in place,
right,
or uphold the policies. But so we're just trying to be very thoughtful about it, but not like slowly thoughtful. Like you gotta go fast, you gotta keep up with this stuff. But there are certain things that I guess the way to say it is like there's certain obvious things where it's like, oh no, we're not going to do that, and then there's other things where it's like, well, how could we do that appropriately, right? But I think that it going back to like this is just a fascinating time to be alive. Is we all now, even an individual contributor can effectively have a team, right? Because you have these agents that could work for you, and it's like that's just a fascinating thing to think about, right? If everyone could have a team of people basically working for them, what does the transformation in a company look like when that's possible, right?
Right. I mean, and that's something that we're going through right now. We're a small company, 20, 30 employees, like we're still pretty small. And we're trying to make a shift. I mean, to avoid buzzwords, what is it, like AI native or AI first or
Right.
whatever the terms are? I don't know, but it's just helping people be smarter and work faster. And like you said, have these teams that can work for them. So we're looking at everything from, marketing content development. So you've
Yep.
got, one or two marketing people that have 10, 12 agents behind them that are trolling news sites every day, generating content. I'm
Right.
not sure if we trust them to post on their own yet,
Right.
but maybe we should have some eyes on before it goes out. But yeah, it's really, really interesting, just that speed and that pace. And,
Yeah.
if you
And that's
don't keep
where,
up with it,
yeah. Well, that's yeah. My thesis on this whole wave is, traditionally, especially like just thinking about technology, right? Traditionally, you have companies that have some idea, they go invest a bunch of money and time into producing the idea, or creating and validating the idea, they make it work, and then it usually remains proprietary, right? They keep it to themselves, so they have a competitive edge, and they go forth and prosper, right? That's kind of how software businesses have always worked. And we're in this time right now where the distribution channel is already thoroughly deployed across the world, right? The fiber networks are in, the mobile networks are in, the social networks are in place. So like so much of the distribution problem of over the last couple decades has been smoothed out, and then you have these giant companies spending billions of dollars to build the most advanced tools available, and as far as we can tell, there isn't anything more advanced than them that's proprietary. They're just releasing it to the whole world at once, right?
Mhm.
Like, the president of the country and me can get the access to the same new state-of-the-art model on the same day, at the same time, for the same price. And when that happens, when something like that is playing out, you kind of have no choice but to pursue that. Because if you don't, and it's actually useful, everyone else will, right? You just have to assume everyone
Right.
else will, and you're going to be left behind. You have to go down that path. And I think the key, the agentic stuff you just mentioned it is like a thing we think about a lot is basically in almost all domains right now where an agent can be thrown at it. It's a question of where do you want the human in the loop, and I think we can
Yep.
all generally agree that you should have the human at the least at the end of the loop to quality check, sanity check, etc. Right? We'll see how that changes. But then it's also like, where's the human otherwise in the loop? Because like, do I need to steer this, or can it just figure it out? And back to the original part of when you brought up this topic, it's like, what does this unlock for startups and software companies overall? It's like beyond just go fast. It's like go in parallel, right? It's a lot cheaper now to try, say, what, give me 5 different versions of this, whatever this thing is, 5 different
Mhm.
articles, 5 different versions of this feature. It's like marginally more expensive to do that. Whereas traditionally that would have been massively more expensive to do, right? Both
Mhm.
in time and money. And then you can be like, yep, that one looks like the best one to continue to iterate on, right? And that unlocks a whole, the way that was solved for in software over the years was dialing down fidelity, right? So it costs a lot of money to make working software that looks good and feels good. So you make a wireframe and you show it to somebody. And then the problem is, it's useful, it's a good technique, but the problem is you're presenting that and saying, use your imagination and tell me if you're going to like this, right?
Right. Mhm.
And we're now in a world where it's like, hey, look, this isn't, I'm not going to ship this, but use this and tell me if you like it. Like the fidelity is at 100% or higher, and it's just an expectation management thing, and that's crazy. That's awesome, right? That
Yeah.
it should be. That's what should make everybody really excited. Is you can go get so much more validation quicker and cheaper, versus having to hone really kind of
Mhm.
obscure techniques because of the cost model that previously applied.
And you can almost make it generate 5 different instances of your UI and like A/B test across a large number of users very quickly.
Yep. Yeah. Or like here's an interesting thing to think about. This would probably work best in like an enterprise case, right? Where you have a good product, you want to, or you have a concept for something, you go meet with a prospect somewhere, and you run it by them, right? And they use it a bit, and they give you a bunch of feedback. And ordinarily, you'd be like, "Cool, let me go back, see what the roadmap looks like, plan this out, and we'll give you a call in a few weeks and see what we can do." Right? You can go back to your hotel and whip it up, whip in, just do all the changes real quick, and show up the next day and be like, "Look, again, not production ready, but we acted on your changes. What do you think?" And you could get that feedback loop down to hours, right?
Yep.
That's crazy. That we've never really had that ability, right? Even like if you did like international arbitrage and had overseas development, it never could do that, right?
Right.
And I don't know. It's pretty wild, right? To think about all of the applicable use cases. And for you guys, you're 20, 30 people, and it's like you look at scaling the company even just a couple of years ago, and it's like, well, eventually we're going to have lots and lots of people. And it's like, maybe you can, how far can you scale at your size,
Hmm.
right? Maybe you only need to get up to like 50 people or something, and you can function like a traditional company that had way more. I don't know.
Hmm.
We'll see where everything takes us.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And you brought up guardrails and you mentioned it a few times, and I could definitely think of multiple different reasons why you need them, right? And I think most people, they think, oh, well, just don't have the model say anything stupid, right? Like, and if you're in like marketing, for example, like you might have a little bit of, people laughing at you on social media if like you just say something wrong or if it generates something weird and you
Right.
don't have that human in the loop. But I was talking with like one of the C-suite guys at a company that makes industrial elevators. And one
Oh,
of the
wow.
things that
Okay.
they're exploring with agents right now is taking all their technical documentation and actually putting it into an interface. So if you're a technician and you're on a job site, and you're troubleshooting, an issue with
Right.
one of the elevators, that it can walk you through, like, ask you, like, well, do you have 12 volts DC on terminal B? Do you have this? Do you have this? And one of the things that was really interesting is where the agent could look at schematics, look at documentation, and say, oh, if you put a jumper between this and this, that'll like fix your problem. But that completely violates all regulations and safety around that
Right.
product. And so, like, you
Right.
could do it for testing, but the technician on the job site might do that, bypass it. Oh, look, elevator works great. And now you have like
Right.
an entire safety mechanism bypassed on a job
Yeah.
site. And so, those guardrails are important, but, how do you even begin to like make the agent say, "Oh wait, don't do that because now that sensor is no longer active," right? Like maybe
Yeah.
that's you can do that in training, but that's still really hard to do.
It is, and that's actually a really compelling example because, um, anytime you're building for the physical world, right? There's the potential for physical risk, right? Or even just mistakes, and in a regulated space, you got to be careful there too, right? And like
Hmm.
one could argue, you could be like, well, just make an agent that's smart on all the regulations, and it's like, yeah, but like, where does this end, right? Like, you eventually, it's like, do you have an agent representing every part of the world, right? Because there's so many
Right.
things to consider. Um, and that kind of still goes back to like the human in the loop thing, right? And I think the primary challenge with keeping, figuring out where to put the humans in the loop and what to do
Hmm.
is, no matter what, all of these tools and models and everything, represent a dramatic acceleration of output, right? Just like
Right.
volume and speed. And humans aren't getting any faster. We can only compute and think hard about so many things at once, that, it's like guardrails and constraints, right? It's like, because otherwise your option is like, well, we need to go faster, so we're just going to keep pulling humans out of the loop. And it's like, that may not produce the eventual result you want.
Right.
Um, and we think a lot about that, right? Like, you need. I think this is the time where like software architects, like people who have built a lot of things,
Hmm.
and they've seen things break many more ways than somebody straight out of college, right? And that's no offense to somebody straight out of college. Just like, it's not something you can really teach that well. It's born of generally of experience,
Right.
and there's a lot of commentary right now of like the challenges that are facing people entering into the market right out of school or whatnot. And I think that's overcomable as long as they embrace the tooling and just somehow earn themselves the opportunity to go actually put something in the world, because then they're going to be able to learn really quickly what happens when things like break or don't work as you assumed, right?
Right. But do you think Claude Code can take a non-developer and make them into a developer? Or do you think you already have to be a developer and it can just make you better?
So that's a great question. I was actually talking to my friend last night about this exact thing. He's a doctor, so he's like, I don't understand software engineering. So it was a fun conversation of like trying to translate it in real time and make it
Hmm.
understandable. And what I was telling him, I was like, he's like, when did? Because I was like, it's all dramatically changed in just a few months. And he's like, really? Like when? I was like, November 24th. And he's like, why that day? And I was like, that was the day their Opus 4.5 came out, and it was the day that before that day people look at Claude Code, or engineers were looking at Claude Code as like, cool, this is a great tool to back me up and help me do my job. And on
Hmm.
that day on, it flipped where it's like, wait a minute, I can, if I feed this thing the right stuff at the right time, I can just follow it and ensure it's producing what I would have otherwise produced, right? And it wasn't just them. Like just shortly thereafter, like the latest versions of OpenAI's models, and then they released the Codex model, which specifically for coding came out, and it was like that was a crazy couple weeks where we're like, oh my goodness,
Hmm.
and so to your question, again, as cliche as it sounds, it's like it all comes down to context, right? And so, like a product manager, traditionally should be the owner of the why, right? They should have the empathy side of the customer side. Like, hey, here's the why we need to solve this problem. Here's why it's valuable, and here's what the problem is. So they're really well situated to provide that context, assuming they're using the right stack of framework, harness, and model. But at the same time too, it's like an engineer who are also very good at the first thing when a product manager shows up with here's a problem, here's why we need to solve it, you're going to get a why from the engineer too, like why do I need to do this now, right? And so
Right.
they're all just cerebral people. And so I think that there's like for everyone can build software now. Everyone can create software, right? Truly. I'm seeing it. I have a number of people on my team who are not engineers at all, and they are literally creating software to solve their own problems. And so I think that is true right now. Building software that you drop into a scaled situation, or a context that needs incredible robustness, requires a lot more thoughtful approach.
Hmm.
And that's where engineers are, we have to give them everything they need to be supported and go fast and do what they need to do. And so I think it really comes down to scale and robustness, right? If you want to build a prototype, you can do it in an hour on your phone. It's crazy. But that doesn't mean you can go deploy it at like Facebook scale, right?
Right.
That's a whole different ball game at that point.
Yeah, it's exactly like you said. For us, one of the experiences I had with it was usually our UI UX designer would put Figmas in front of me, and I would
Yeah.
just add comments to that. And next thing you know, like I get a link, it's like, hey, check out this, and it was a full blown web app with it implemented with like 6 different ways of doing it. I could just toggle
Right.
between each one, and I'm like, hey, there we go.
That's
But
awesome.
like none of that would go in front of a customer. Right. I mean,
Right.
unless we're asking like, which one of the 6 do you like, kind of a thing, versus then that goes to the developers. The developers can play with it, then they can write their own instructions up and generate
Right.
their code for it and stuff. So it was really interesting when typically non-coders are all of a sudden putting MVPs and A/B testing with like
Right.
apps that they probably generate even faster than they would have using the Figma tool.
Yeah, yeah, and this, I think there's a lot of chatter and news coverage right now on, you keep hearing like the SaaS apocalypse and all this stuff, and I think that's a
Yeah.
little overblown. But what's interesting is if you think about it on the topic of like internal tooling, right? The tools that are most companies solve for with either manual process or spreadsheets, right? And then the really big companies have the budgets to afford internal tooling teams. Like that's what they do, right? Most software companies, when presented with like these things we can build for customers to go get more revenue and grow the business, or these internal tools, the answer is usually the first thing, always, right? And so I think we're now in this era of like, no, we can actually build really robust internal tools, and that, that's the perfect domain for all these people who are not traditionally software engineers, they're not even close to being a software engineer.
Hmm.
They don't have to deal with scale, and they can just elevate. I mean, we did this recently with we have a fairly robust spreadsheet we use like for discovery, right, with customers. Where we're talking enterprise customer. There's a lot of stakeholders, a lot of needs, a lot of things, and somebody turned it into a really robust web application in like a week, and it's so much easier to manage the schema of it, to track progress, search within it, etc. And it's going to reduce so much drag in the process. And that was like thinking about like, hey, can I get an engineer to turn this spreadsheet into a web app a year ago? I would just be like, no, just use a spreadsheet, And now it's like, oh,
Right.
cool, a non-engineer did it, and here we go. This is great. And so I think this would just be incredibly transformative to every business. And the risk becomes like something we talk about a lot is like you can go so fast, so quick. Like I can go from right now to check this out in an hour or two, that it actually puts a lot of pressure on like upfront coordination, because it's entirely possible two or more people are solving the same problem at once, right?
Right.
And you run into like a fragmentation problem, right? And so we're we we're standing up and formalizing, without reducing or introducing too much friction into the world. Like here's like the specification standards we're expecting, right? And then you got to solicit that around, get some alignment, ensure nobody else already did that and just didn't tell you, and then go forth and prosper, right?
Right.
Which was less of a problem before these tools because the constraints were different, right? There was throughput
Hmm.
constraints that were different, and you didn't have to stress about duplication too much, right? Now it's like, no, it's entirely possible.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. So, just kind of wrapping up a little bit, do you have any
Yeah.
predictions for what 2036 looks like?
So I joke about this with my wife all the time. My son he'll be 7 next month, a month from tomorrow, actually. And over the years, she's always kind of asked me, ever since we had our son and then our daughter, like, hey, what do you think their life is going to be like when they're 18, right? And when we had my son, she asked me that, and I was like, well, to put it in perspective, wasn't even 18 years ago that the iPhone came out, right? And nobody really remembers
Hmm.
what the world was like before that. And so even then, before all the stuff that's happened in the last couple of years, I was like, I don't quite know, and it kind of makes me uncomfortable. It's like technology has been incredibly rapidly advancing, but in kind of still a linear way. It was just kind of like building and compounding on top, and now, I mean, to put it in perspective, ChatGPT didn't launch for consumer use until like 3 years ago. Like it wasn't that long ago, and now it's like the only thing people talk about
Hmm.
basically. And and so it's like I don't even know where to begin in 2036, which will be when my son is almost 18. And I think that broadly, I think that by then we'll have seen substantial like societal reaction to things. I think like things like education as a I think it's gonna I would hope it looks dramatically evolved because of this. If we can have everybody can have a brain in front of you that can guide you forward and help you learn at your pace or to your needs or etc. I would hope that's deeply ingrained. For example, I think that in our space in transportation, I think we're going to finally see a lot of the let's call them legacy silos start to truly break down,
Hmm.
because it's like think about how many systems are out there that are running their software systems running where everyone who created them and understands them is retired, and there's not a lot of people learning the technology in the first place. It's like the whole financial institution is based off of that kind of stuff with layers on top.
Yep.
We're now in a place where the tooling is either there or about to be there, where you can go crack those things back open and modernize them. And what does
Hmm.
that unlock, right? Like, and we can probably start to see like, so many things in transportation are born of just networking problems. Just information isn't getting to the right person at the right time, right? And
Yep.
I think a lot of that is rooted in system problems. And I think that by 10 years from now, a lot of that will probably be behind us and look dramatically different because the systems will finally be able to be worked on again.
Yeah, that'll be it's going to be a very interesting ride. Like you, I don't know how to predict 2036 at this point. Like I
No.
thought I did at one point, but things are just moving too fast now. So,
Yeah,
but anyway, thank you very much, Darren, for coming on. Really appreciate it. Do you have any closing
absolutely.
thoughts?
No, well, of course, thanks for having me, and thanks for being a great partner of ours. I think what you guys are doing is fantastic and needed. I think it's sometimes it's easy to get excited and then forget about being secure. And you gotta
Yeah.
you gotta have all those things prioritized at once, right? And so yeah, love working with you guys. Appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys, and thanks for having me on. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you. We'll see you later.
All right, man. See ya.